Hi, I'm Larry Levin with Bob Cohn once again for another edition of Cop Talk, and we have lots to talk about, so let's get going.
As usual.
The new president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, heads to Iran this week for a rather hateful conference that will allow Arab nations to dump on Israel, show hatred toward Jews. I hate to ask you a leading question, but after being the victor in democratic elections coming on the heels of the Arab Spring, what possible good for Egyptian democracy can come of Morsi giving credibility to this conference?
Well, none, nor would it be something to celebrate that Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, also is giving legitimacy to this non-aligned nations gathering. At one time, that was a respectable alternative between the First World and Second World.
Right.
But now it's just a gathering of people that use it as an excuse to bash Israel, especially in Tehran.
Now, Moon at least got there, and a couple of the first things he did were, A, to tell them that their human rights record hasn't been so hot, and B, to tell them to lay off of Israel in their international discourse. So at least, even though probably Ban Ki-moon shouldn't have been there,
Correct.
He at least was speaking out more forcefully than the United Nations has been known to do.
And he has spoken out on the ongoing crisis in Syria as well.
Mm-hmm. Since we're on the subject of the United Nations, you sadly gave comments today at the memorial service for Larry Karp, lawyer with very strong ties to the UN and diplomacy, a contributor of Stories to the Light. Talk about Larry real quickly.
Larry Karp is an authentic, was a Renaissance man in the true sense of the word. If anything, it was an understatement. Here was an individual with stratospherically high IQ, recognized at a young age, volunteered for the Army at the age of 17, was tapped by the State Department when he was just in his 20s, and worked at the United Nations from its very origins in the mid-1940s all the way up until the end of his days, including on the Arab-Israeli peace process. He had the rank of ambassador officially, which he never bandied about. A very modest person who was only proud of the fact that he brought popcorn to Paris.
Let's stay with international affairs in Israel in particular. A terrible situation the last couple of weeks where Israeli teenagers attacked Palestinians as kids and were arrested for it. 10 of them were arrested. What do you make of some of the ethnic hostility that's going on?
Well, it is a very serious matter. There is hooliganism on the part of Jewish teens in Israel. Some of them are from the former Soviet Union and some are Sabras and so forth. To the credit of the government, they have universally denounced these horrific acts, and they have called for seminars in every school under the aegis of the Ministry of Education to make sure that this is drummed into the young people there. Unfortunately, and there was an article in the New York Times that one of the Palestinian teens said that, the Israelis are taught hatred, and the counter to that is the Palestinian textbooks also contain hateful rhetoric. So a good first step would be to eliminate the incitement on the Palestinian side and among the settler crowd, the ultra-Orthodox groups who foment ethnic hatred. It would be terrible for Israel to descend into ethnic cleansing.
And it wasn't probably the best week for the ruling to come out that the guy, Israeli, who was driving the steamroller that resulted in the death of Rachel Corrie was exonerated.
Right. Exactly. The timing. The Dutch position is very unfortunate.
We also have a dismantlement of one of the settlements in the West Bank per order of the Supreme Court. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's a very positive thing that the Supreme Court has ruled and that the government is carrying out a dismantlement of a settlement in areas that clearly are beyond what Israel could legitimately claim as disputed land. And I think that's a positive step. And maybe there will be some behind-the-scenes approaches on the Middle East peace process. I know that there has been some call, but Dennis Ross recently made published an op-ed calling on Israel to be proactive in seeking more dialogue with the Palestinians.
One thing that the backdrop against this is the full fervor of the state of Israel right now across the country about whether there will be an attack on Iran this fall. And of course, gas masks are being passed out.
Yep.
People are preparing bomb cellars. It's in the news. Like, you have any predictions on what you think is likely to happen?
I sure hope there will not be a resort to military action, but even the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency, their most recent reports are that Iran has sharply stepped up its enrichment of uranium, and more isotopes are now functioning. and the clock is really ticking. There's a tremendous amount of political pressure on Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, and Ehud Barak, the defense minister. We'll have to wait and see. I'm hesitant to predict. I think if there is going to be an Israeli attack, I would guess that it would be right after the American election, no matter who wins.
Well, let's talk about that, because clearly that's a factor for Israel in what they decide to do. In the 2008 presidential election, we saw the Jewish vote break over 70% for President Obama. Some said close to 78 by exit polls, but that was debunked. But we think it was at least in the low 70s. Do you see that's likely to change in this particular election cycle?
There have been some reliable polls, and again, none of them are fully reliable, that indicate that Obama may have lost 8 to 10 points among likely Jewish voters.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to see how that all plays out. The Obama administration, I think, wants to give more time to diplomacy, perhaps, than Israel is comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Romney and Ryan have taken a much harder line. On the other hand, they're not in office yet, and sometimes once someone is in office, the practicalities of ruling differ from the adventures of campaigning.
It's true, and as we heard David Minkowski say in the spring here, the United States looking at it from the perspective of a country with a lot more oomph to their defense forces, may be willing to stretch it out a little longer than Israel.
Exactly.
So we have, interestingly, our own local election among two Jewish candidates with an interesting twist: Stacey Newman and Susan Carlson.
Very interesting.
A one vote outcome. And now the Board of Election Commissioners went to the court and said, hey, over 100 voters didn't get to cast their ballot for that particular state representative district because they were given the wrong ballot. What are your thoughts about the way this has been handled?
Well, I hope there is a runoff election, because there are a sufficient number.
It's now been announced there's going to be.
For sure, that was a just decision. I wish they didn't have to run against each other without formally endorsing them. I like them both a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think it was even more unfortunate that when Carnahan and Clay had to face off against each other, because they had identical constituencies, identical records. They worked very closely together as part of a progressive/Jewish caucus to counteract the extreme right-wing tendencies of our Missouri General Assembly.
Got it. That's all I got for this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about, and we'll see you next time on Cop Talk.